Hello everyone, I wanted to make a video talking about the fears of psychosis, the fears of going crazy, the fears of having schizophrenia, bipolar, split personality disorder, which happens but isn't as common probably as schizophrenia and bipolar, manic depressive episodes, losing control because of the way the media portrays it, the way that movies portray it, and anything that you're afraid of. Because remember, all OCD cycles are latching on to you not living the life that you want to live. So when you have a chronic extreme OCD, you're trying to get yourself back to a baseline where you're enjoying life again, which actually keeps you in the cycle, stuck more and more and more because you're chasing a sensation. It's so important to cover that. So before I go any further, please look for that What's Up link down below. Direct message Phil will get you in right away. And like I said, we work with all time zones. You know, I do calls anywhere from 5 in the morning up to about 9 o'clock at night, depending on where people are around the world. And then we have those webinars at 8:30 p.m. every single UK time. We'll be going back. Daylight saving is over on this Sunday, so we'll go back to the normal times. The webinar this week, it was funny. I had a bunch of people show up, and they're not working in the time zones. So they're like, why isn't the webinar starting? I'm like, because they went back a week before us. And we always joke around with that. So, but then when it goes back in March, it goes back like 17 days early. It's some crazy stuff. Anyway, so remember what I said. OCD thrives in a fear environment of trying to return to a baseline of peace. Also, because you believe that non-OCD sufferers have a magical existence, which certainly isn't true. I have a lot of friends who do not have OCD or anxiety-based disorders, and they have really unfortunate circumstances based off their belief systems. So it is important to state that when you get back to a baseline of peace, you are going to have a lot of things go wrong in your life. If you don't become good at solving problems and handling the minutiae stress throughout life, whether it's being a mother with 2 kids, whether it's working in a company, whether it's owning your own business, whether it's working in the ER, or anything like that, you're going to have struggles for the remainder of your life in many different ways. If you live long enough, you could have your kids die before you, your parents can die before you more than likely, like I lost my father, and all these other things. So it's not going to go just like you return to a baseline level of peace, then you never have any problems in your life ever again. That's not how it goes. So that is an important thing to start with when it comes to fear of psychosis, because you're like, I don't want that. Well, number one, let's even just talk about what psychosis is. Okay, psychosis is a state of losing control, where you really are doing things, whether it's verbally, screaming at people, yelling at people. We've all seen people in really unfortunate circumstances where they're homeless. They're yelling at people, they're screaming, and these are really sad cases. I watch a really good YouTube channel called White Underbelly. I found it like a couple months ago. I've seen stuff from it over the years. Some of you might know Mark. I think his name is Mark. It's a really crazy YouTube channel where he interviews people in schizophrenic episodes. That is an extremely good exposure. He did one yesterday, update on a guy named Chris, who I've watched a couple of his. It's really sad, but it's important from an exposure standpoint that you're reading symptoms on bipolar, schizophrenia, split personality, and you're also watching documentaries on it. But then you're trying to apply acceptance when you're doing it. That's a really important part. So psychosis is a state of losing control, okay? So there are people that do not have OCD or anxiety-based disorders or personality-based disorders, and they have episodes of psychosis. Maybe it's after a severe concussion. Maybe it's after childbirth. I've heard stories like this. And these are where all the avoidance behaviors come in. Won't have kids, won't put themselves in situations where they could have head injuries, and they live a very careful life. Okay, well, that's a big problem because you're going to die one day anyway. You're not going to be here in a conscious state that we know of, and you're not going to have enjoyed many things in life because of the fears. Super common. Many people do this. Probably wouldn't recommend it. You don't have to go out there and, be a skydiver or something, but it's important if you got to make a list of the things you're avoiding, and you have to slowly start chipping away at that. That's a very important thing for your recovery. So the thing that scares people the most about schizophrenia and bipolar is, number one, they're Googling it too much. Not in the sense of like, some people, they will look up the symptoms and they'll do it too much. So the example that I just said doesn't go for everyone. But I work with people who are so scared to look up the symptoms because they're going to have a panic attack. So this can go 2 different ways, right? Avoidance of looking things up, or you're looking it up too much. If you're looking it up too much, they're usually not watching YouTube videos on schizophrenia and bipolar. They're usually looking up symptoms, or they're going to Reddit. That has to stop. Many people are not actually sitting down and watching a documentary. The one I recommend is type in schizophrenic interview Chris. He has really long hair. It's on the White Underbelly one. That's a really good one. And then there's plenty of psychosis documentaries out there as well, okay? That's if you're not doing that. If you're watching them too much to prove to yourself why you don't have schizophrenia or bipolar, that has to go. So let's be very, very frank. The world is extremely unfair. There's no such thing as universal fairness, and there's no such thing as universal deservingness, or else all the things that happen around the world throughout history would have never happened, because we would be living in a place of delusion, right? But the world is extremely violent. There's extremely unfortunate circumstances. Some people, the thing about Chris, this is great for some of you to hear, will be good. Lots of triggers in this video, which is a good thing. Being triggered is a good thing, because you're facing your fears, and then you could change your beliefs. So the guy Chris, I think he has the red hoodie, because there's two different Chris's on the YouTube channel of white underbelly. But the one where he's like in a live schizophrenic psychosis state, and he was abusing crystal meth as well, he said that he had no history of psychosis or schizophrenia in his family, but like the gene, I think it's the same principle, 1 to 2% of the population, or maybe lower than that, has the schizophrenic gene, very similar to the OCD gene, but 1 to 2% of the population does not have schizophrenia. So he smoked weed, or he took an edible, I can't remember which one, and it turned on schizophrenia psychosis. And that was at 29 years old or something like that, and then automatically he had schizophrenia in that moment for the rest of his life. And he was homeless at the time. He would go in and out of psychosis. I'm not an expert on psychosis, so I don't know how it works for certain people, but I would imagine some people stay in psychosis for longer than other people, like any relapse and remission and like any disease, etc. So that's a really good thing to watch, because it happens. In the last 2 to 3 months, I've had probably about 10 people come in with OCD, especially DPDR, existential OCD, that have developed after taking an edible, taking shrooms, not really understanding how dosages of psilocybin work, they're taking large mass quantities, taking a bunch of edibles, not having any experience with edibles, and then they got latched in the state. Super common. You're going to have to break your fears down of DPDR. You're going to have to break your fears down of being stuck like that. And this is a big place for schizophrenia and bipolar fears. Am I going crazy? I never had this before, etc. So now let's look at the realities of if you had schizophrenia and if you had bipolar, okay? Well, number one, you're very thankful to have schizophrenia and bipolar in today's world, because we have medications that can help ease symptoms. Now, again, the other scary thing about schizophrenia and bipolar is people understand that they're personality-based disorders. So because people see them as personality-based disorders, they're like, that's something that's going to stick with me forever, and I'm never going to be able to get better from that. Well, that is a number one compulsion, because you're looking that up, trying to prove, trying to see, do I have schizophrenia? Do I have this? Blah, 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 blah. But you won't watch the documentaries on schizophrenia because you're just trying to compare symptoms in a format on a text on Google. So I know exactly what you're doing. But you're like, I'm not watching that. So what people will do with POCD is they'll look up symptoms. They'll be like, how do I know if this is real or not? Or how do I know if I'm a serial killer or not? But then they're not watching documentaries on these scenarios, because that brings it more to life. So you think you're being sneaky in your mind, but you're not. I know exactly what you're doing. Because, I had severe chronic OCD, and I do have the genetic capabilities, because more than likely it's genetic. A lot of people think it's environment, but my best, a little off track on that is, I always say to people, I think it's a great way to say it, if OCD was purely environmental and there was no genetic basis whatsoever, how do you explain all the genes and families? And on top of that, what is OCD fueled off of? Irrational beliefs. Well, last time I checked, every single person I've ever met has extremely strong, rigid, irrational beliefs. I've never met someone who's born, reared in a natural, unconditional manner. So if that was the genesis, if it was just irrational beliefs and environment, well, everyone goes through things. Their family members die, they get diagnosed with stuff. That means every single person on this planet would have chronic OCD by default. If it was just based off of the irrational beliefs and environmental factor and stressors. People go through college, people go through med school, people become accountants, they work in hospitals. Every single person that works in the ER has irrational beliefs, and every single person in the ER goes through really traumatic experiences. So by default, they'd all have chronic OCD. It doesn't work like that. And we know that, so it's funny to me to think that there's not a genetic basis. Do I know that for sure? No, but it's more than likely what's going on. Back to psychosis and schizophrenia. So we live in a good time to have schizophrenia and bipolar, because we have the medications today that can really help with that. But on the other side of that, it's still really tough. It wouldn't be an easy life. It's like when someone asks me, well, what would happen if I went to jail for POCD fears? It's gonna be tough. It's gonna be really tough. But life isn't easy. I didn't ask to have chronic OCD. I didn't ask to become chronically latched to my saliva, swallowing and blinking, and notice every single blink for the rest of my life, or in that time, I thought, because my fear was so high, but that went on for a couple of years, obviously. I didn't ask to have extreme body dysmorphia, where every single time I woke up, the first thing I thought about was how I was going to eat today, how I was going to work out, etc. I didn't think that. It just happened because I have the genetics, because my father had it. I have multiple cousins that have it, other family members. His mom had it. My grandma, his mother had extreme contamination OCD, probably moral responsibility if I could get in there and kind of chip away, but she's been dead for 20 years now, etc. It's just not as simple as, oh my God, if I have schizophrenia, it would be the worst thing ever. You just think that because you haven't deconstructed the belief system surrounding schizophrenia, okay? This isn't a reassurance statement. There are people out there that have schizophrenia that live moderately content lives. And I'll tell you what, having schizophrenia and psychosis and, grandiose delusions and manic depressive episodes, I'll tell you what, if you have schizophrenia and you're living in your parents' house in a basement and you have video games, and this isn't ideal, but and you have a comfy bed and you could be watched over and you could go to a mental hospital. Holy fuck, that is a much better way to have schizophrenia. I would much rather have chronic OCD today or schizophrenia or bipolar than any other time in history because of the medications and the help and the support systems. So it's so important to look at it from that perspective. And that's not comparative suffering. That's gratitude and gratefulness. And you're breaking those things down. Now, I don't have schizophrenia and I don't have bipolar, but I have severe OCD. I had severe OCD. So, we can compare all we want. Neither of them are easy. None of them are easy. So, but at least we have tools today. Also, cool fact, this is just a hypothesis, is that it would be really interesting to take people with severe bipolar and schizophrenia and sit them down and put them through trials of REBT and unconditional acceptance. Because we have absolutely no literature on that. And I'm not the most literature-based person because we can become hyper-focused on research. But it is really cool to think about that. Now, do I think if you sat 100 in psychosis episodes, schizophrenics down, you'd be able to rationalize with them through an unconditional acceptance? Not so much rationalize, but break down rational thinking. Probably not. But it's just the way it is. So things happen. People get diagnosed with cancer. People develop schizophrenia. Once you realize that life isn't fair, and once you become more comfortable with the realities of the brutal nature, just naturalistic way that life works, the brain, neurology, events, wars, just illnesses, you start to realize that this is just unfortunately the way life is. That doesn't mean it has to be depressing. And I'm not saying that having schizophrenia and bipolar would not be easy by any means. It would be extremely difficult. But on the other side of that, there is hope. We have the medications today. You could still live a moderately content life in many ways. And we see that because there are documentaries of people who have schizophrenia. And there's probably other, again, I'm not an expert on this, just the fear surrounding it. I call myself an expert on it, living with chronic OCD for years, is that, again, there are probably milder cases, which is true, but even if you had the most severe schizophrenic case on earth, even if it kept you away from relationships, even if it kept you away from working, you could be on disability, you could get money from the government, you could have a family structure. Even if you had none of those and you were homeless, there are still people who have schizophrenia living on the street, like you'll see when you watch Chris's documentary, that aren't chronically anxious, that they let off, they might have depression, etc. But you could still make do with those scenarios. I'm pretty sure if you told me I was going to be homeless tomorrow and I had to live in a tent for 5 years, after about a week or so, I'd probably become accustomed to it. I wouldn't like it, but I have to figure out to make the best. I get a lot of walking in, I know that. That would be a good thing. I probably would walk across America. If you told me I had to be homeless for 5 years, I definitely would go from like LA to New York. I would just try to make it happen and see what happens. Probably meet some really cool people along the way. Probably really sad cases too, but it would be a very unique experience, to be honest. So thank you again for watching. Look for that WhatsApp link down below. Direct message Phil. Remember, webinars every Tuesday, 8:30 p.m. UK time. And we got that, like I said, the WhatsApp thing is really cool. And I'll let you guys know more. I'm mentioning it in all my videos about the conference when that comes up. Hopefully in the next 6 months. Again, this is very early stages, but just to get the word out there, just so people can get thinking about it. And like I said, we're going to have a lot of different speakers there. We'll have all the moderators. We're probably going to do a live real talk which will be really cool. Have like 10 of us talking and just all of you just listening in to kind of us doing a real talk in live time. And that would be really cool. Thank you again, everyone, as always, and have a great day.